Okay, welcome back. We're going to cover a couple of things. First I'm going to focus on a way to kind of improve your memory, a totally different way than what we focused on before. And we're going to use the first set of leadership principles from the High Impact Leaders class as a way to kind of demonstrate this. The technique it's a technique that has been around for years and years and years. It's a technique called the pegging technique. And the reason why you'll know it's kind of old because the word pegging comes from the old pegboards. If you remember back, actually, most of you who are probably listening to this right now probably have never seen one of these things. But way back in the old days, in garages, they used to have pegboards. It'd be a board back on the wall of a garage, and it would have holes that you would stick metal rods in, and you can hang up your tools, right? So basically, what this memory technique is it's kind of like that. It's kind of like setting up a wall that you can put memories into to kind of memorize things. Well, what we're going to use this for is there's 28 people principles in the High Impact Leaders class, and so one of the things that we use these for is to teach people how to remember every single one of these 28 people principles, which is kind of cool. So at the end if you watch all 4 of the videos, you should be able to, if somebody came up to you and said, hey, what's the 12th principle? The 12th one will kind of pop into your head. So it's a really, really kind of cool technique. In order to do this, though, let me give you a little bit of background about the people principles first, and then we'll go into the memory technique. The way that the people principles are kind of set up, they're set up in 4 different component parts. What we've kind of figured out is there are 4 stages to being a really, really good leader. The first stage is that you really have to build that trust, really build that rapport, because until that trust is there with the people that are around you, you're not going to be able to influence them at all, right? So you have to have the trust. The second thing you have to do is once the trust is there, once everybody kind of likes each other, now you can start resolving kind of conflicts, because in fact, if the trust is there, you'll have fewer conflicts. But every once in a while, something's not going to go right, and so when things kind of go wrong, you have to be able to kind of fix those things. So conflict resolution, that kind of thing. The third set of principles are gaining cooperation. So once people are, once we have kind of a team atmosphere and the conflicts are lessened, now we can start to influence people. Now we can start to motivate and inspire people. And then finally, the 4th set of people principles is about building your next generation of leaders. So how do you build people around you to kind of replace you? So those are the 4 sets of principles. Now the way that the High Impact Leaders class work is that one of the best ways anyway to kind of teach this class is over a 4-week class. Basically, what we typically do is we'll spend about a half day per week for a total of 4 weeks. And in week number 1, we'll cover that first set of people principles. We'll teach them how to really build that trust and rapport, build that team atmosphere, build that team environment. And then at the end of that session, we say, okay, now go out and use this stuff. And then we come back the next week, and basically there's built-in accountability, so it holds people accountable for applying the skill sets that we focused on in the previous week. So next week we add the second set of principles, and the next week we add the third set of principles. So in each set of principles we have 7 principles, because we ask people just focus on 1 a day. If you want to change behaviors, focus on 1 a day. So basically that's kind of the way that the class works, is we focus on the first 7 people principles for the first week. So day number 1, you're working on principle number 1. And you don't go to sleep until you've used that principle somewhere. You've influenced somebody using that principle, influenced somebody in a positive way, right? And then day number 2, you're using principle number 2. Day number 3, you're using principle number 3. So by the end of 28 days, you should have changed some of your habits in dealing with people pretty effectively anyway. So this memory technique that we're going to show you is something that will help you memorize each one of these 28 people principles. So we're going to focus on the first 7. Now the way that the pegging system works is that the first thing you have to do is kind of create the pegboard, or create the foundation. Once you've got the foundation set, you can stick any memory into the pegboard and remember a list of items. So you can use this for all kinds of things. I mean, if you're going to the grocery store and you have 5 or 6 or 7 things that you need to pick up, you can put those in your pegging system so you can find them. If you're on your way to work and there's like a few things that you need to do when you come into the office, then you can use this pegging system to help you recall those items. So you can use it for just about anything. But the cool thing is that if you have a long list of items, like 28, it's really cool because it makes it to where you can memorize each one of these things. Okay, so enough kind of background. Let's kind of show you how to set this thing up. All right, so the way that this works is that the pegging system it basically works on mnemonics. So basically what I'm going to do is I will say a number, And that number will correspond with the numbered items. And then for each number, we're going to give you a word and a picture that corresponds with that number. A lot of times the numbers will rhyme with the picture. It'll make sense in a moment, but so just kind of bear with me as we kind of go through it. So like for instance, the words that I use with my numbers are like one and run, because they sound alike, right? So one run. For two, I use the word zoo. For three, I use tree. For four, I use door. For five, I use hive, like a beehive. Six, I use sick. Seven, I use heaven, right? So those are the first seven. So one run, two zoo, three tree, four door, five hive, six sick, seven heaven. So for each one of those words, we're going to put a picture with that, and that picture is going to be kind of like the peg on the pegboard, right? So like for one run, picture I like to use, and you can use any picture that kind of helps you think of the word run, but the one I use like a horse race. So there's a horse racing down a thoroughfare, and whatever it is that I want you to remember, I will put in the horse's saddle. So basically, whatever the image, I create an image of that memory that I want to retain, and I'll put that in the horse's saddle. So one run is always in the horse's saddle. Whatever it is I want to remember is in the horse's saddle. Two zoo, a lot of times I like to think of them at the monkey cages at the zoo. And basically, you know what monkeys do is they like to kind of play around. So, you know, monkeys like to pick things up and kind of throw them through the bars at the zoo, right? So basically, whatever it is that you want to remember, the monkeys are picking it up and throwing it out of the cage at the zoo. So, two zoo, you're at the monkey cages. Three tree, I like to think of the White House on Christmas Day. They have that big, huge Christmas tree out in the back of the White House. And at the very top of the Christmas tree is usually some kind of ornament, usually a star or angel, that kind of thing. Well, instead of a star or angel in this tree, we're going to put the third item. Whatever it is that we want to remember is going to be at the top of that tree. Four door, in a big city, you're going into a revolving door, you know, one of those doors that kind of spin around, except the door won't move because in between the door and the door jamb is the item. Whatever it is that you want to remember is actually in that door jamb. For five hive, you know, in the middle of the woods, there's a big, huge beehive. You got nothing better to do, so you go kick it. When you do, this beehive cracks open, and the bees are kind of swarming around you. And you look very closely, and then their little bee feet is the item. Whatever it is you want to remember is actually in the bee feet, right? So sick, obviously those bee stings didn't do so well, so now you're at the hospital, and you're in one of those hospital rooms with two beds. So you're in one bed, and your roommate is in the other, and you look over the bed, and it's actually not a patient at all. It's whatever item that you want to remember is in the bed next to you in the hospital. And it didn't go so well at this hospital either, because seven heaven is you're kind of walking up the stairway to heaven, and you get about halfway, and all of a sudden you see an archangel at the top of the staircase, and the angel's going, "No, it's not your time. Go back." So in order to get your attention, the angel kind of picks items up and starts throwing them down the stairs at you. So whatever it is that you want to remember is the item that's kind of falling down the stairs. So let's go back and review these real quick. Okay, so one run, remember the item is in the horse's saddle, right? And then two zoo, the monkeys are throwing the items out of their cage. And then three tree, you're at the White House, big huge Christmas tree, and the item is at the top of the Christmas tree. Four door, the item that you remember is in the revolving door. So it's keeping the door from moving. And then five hive, the item is in the bee feet. Six sick, the item is in the hospital bed next to you. And then seven heaven, the angel's kind of tossing the item down the stairs. Okay, so that's the imagery that you kind of use as the foundation. And we can put any pictures that we want into these any memories anyway that we want into the pegging system. We're going to use pictures that will correspond to the first 7 people principles, 7 ways to build trust and rapport. So in that horse's saddle, for one run, in the horse's saddle, the image I want you to keep in mind for this one is a movie critic. You know, like, remember in the old days it was Siskel and Ebert, so let's say Roger Ebert is in that horse's saddle, except he's backwards, you know, so let's put him in the horse's saddle backwards, kind of bouncing up and down in that horse's saddle. So as the horse runs down the track, Roger Ebert looks like he's about to fall out. He's having a really tough time holding on, right? To zoo, those monkeys are throwing a telescope, right? So you know something that you use up to look up into the stars, and the monkeys are as they throw the telescopes, there's like tripods on the bottom of them, and so when they fly through the air, they're spinning, they're making like a boomerang sound, right? So the monkeys, to zoo, the monkeys are throwing telescopes at you. 3 tree. At the top of the tree is a smiley face guy, like on the t-shirts or on the Walmart ads, that kind of thing. So big yellow smiley face guy at the top of the Christmas tree. And then 4 door, in between the door and the door frame is one of those name plates, those big wooden name plates that like CEOs put on their desk, big kahunas put on their desk to kind of let people know who they are, right? So it's one of those big name plates, and the door won't move because it's kind of acting as a wedge in that revolving door. And then 5 hive in the bee feet. We're going to put a beast of burden, and each one of the little bees in their feet is a beast of burden. Like a donkey or an ox, that kind of thing. An animal that you would see on a farm, maybe. So a beast of burden, and they look kind of weird because they're kind of floating in the air, but they're floating in kind of a weird way because they're in the bee feet, right? So the beast of burden is in the bee feet, and then sick in that hospital bed is we're going to make it. A cell phone with a broken antenna. Well, let's kind of update it a little bit. Let's make it a cell phone with no bars, right? Or a cell phone it's not like a 4G, it's like a 1G or something like that, right? So you know how sometimes you go through a tunnel and you lose connection. It's one of those. And the cell phone is kind of sitting over. It's a huge oversized cell phone in the hospital bed, and it's kind of tucked in under the cover. So cell phone with it's like a 1G. It's like there's no G's on this thing, right? So really crappy old. In fact, let's change that. Let's make it to be like a 1980s cell phone. One of those big oversized things. That were like a brick that you put up on your ear. So it's those kind of things. You're going to have a tough time communicating on one of those. And then finally, 7 heaven, tumbling down the stairs in heaven is a set of those like Bose noise canceling headphones that you see people on the airplanes wearing. So it's a big set of those headphones, and in fact, there's dozens of them kind of tumbling down the stairs over and over and over again. All right, let's go back and kind of review them real quick. Every one of those pictures will correspond to one of these first 7 people principles. So the very first thing was in the horse's saddle, if you recall, and in fact, the best way to do this is that as I call the item or the image, you try to remember what image was was corresponding to that. So, for instance, in the horse's saddle was the movie critic, right? So good, and then. To zoo, the monkeys were throwing the telescope, and then 3 tree at the top of the tree was the smiley face guy. 4 door in that door frame was the name plate, and then 5 hive in the bee feet was this one's the ones that's kind of tricky. It's a beast of burden, right? Donkey, ox, that kind of thing. And then 6 sick in that hospital bed was the oversized cell phone, the old timey kind of cell phone, and then 7 heaven, tumbling down stairway to heaven is the set of noise-canceling headphones. All right, so let's go back. So each one of those pictures will actually correspond to 7 things that you can do to build that trust and rapport. Very first thing, the movie critic in the horse's saddle actually represents the first people principles that you want to avoid criticizing and complaining. So if you want to build a team atmosphere, if you want to build trust, if you want to build rapport, you want to really cut down on the amount of criticism that is in your environment. A lot of times folks think that criticism is the best way to kind of teach somebody something, but in reality, what tends to happen is whatever we reinforce, we get more of. So if we're constantly criticizing somebody, there's a good chance that whatever we're criticizing them for is something they're just going to do more. We've learned that in public speaking. One of the things that we kind of figured out in the Fearless Presentations class year after year after year is that anytime we tell people what they're doing wrong, they will just do it more. So if we say, hey, you're saying they'll just say twice as much, right? So basically, what we figured out is that there are other things that you'll want to do to change people's behavior other than criticism, and in fact, that's in the gaining cooperation session that we're going to cover later on. So seven ways to gain cooperation. Those are 7 things that you can do other than criticize people. A good tip about reducing criticism is that a lot of times what folks will say is, "What about constructive criticism, though, Doug? That kind of works, right?" Yes and no, right? The reason why constructive criticism will work on occasion, it's what I call the relationship bank account that we have. Every time we do something with somebody and have a positive experience with them, it's like a bank account. We're creating a deposit into that bank account, right? Every time we do something negative, we're withdrawing something from that bank account. And if you happen to have a relationship bank account with somebody that is well funded, and you give them constructive criticism, then there's a good chance that they're going to react in a way to where they say, "God, you know what? Doug doesn't criticize me much, so this is probably pretty important. Maybe I should pay attention here, right?" and they might change in spite of the constructive criticism, not necessarily because of it. In reality, though, most of the time we don't have that. We don't have that overabundance in our of saved up positive in that bank account. So if you have a neutral balance in that account, you'll get a much different reaction. In fact, a lot of times what will happen is when you give constructive criticism to somebody without building that rapport with them first, the reaction that they will typically have is, "Who are you to tell me what I need to do," right? And if you have a negative balance in that bank account, the person will actually become angry. So constructive criticism, although it can work, it's one of those things you probably want to use as kind of a last resort, especially if the relationship is important. Now, I know we don't live in a Pollyanna society, and I know that sometimes you have to criticize folks. And that, by the way, there's nothing wrong with criticizing if it's appropriate, right? So, like for instance, if I don't really care about the relationship that I have with somebody, I might criticize them, right? So, maybe it's a cell phone company that I just canceled my contract with, and I'm never going to do business with them ever again. All right, I might add a little criticism on top of that relationship, right? But if you're in a relationship with your coworkers, especially, or people that you work with, that's one that you really want to foster. Really avoid the criticism. Really avoid the complaining. 2Zoo was the telescope. Now, the thing that the telescope helps us represent, or helps us retain or remember, is principle number 2, which is you want to look at things from the other person's perspective. When you're looking through a telescope, you're looking at things from a different kind of perspective, and that's what you want to kind of keep in mind as well. So 2Zoo, you look at things from the other person's perspective. It doesn't mean you have to agree with them, by the way. It just means that if you kind of understand where they're coming from, if you understand why they're saying the things that they're saying, then what that does is it helps you better communicate with them, right? So before you kind of try to get people to buy into what you're saying, sometimes it might be a good idea to kind of listen to them and kind of figure out where they're coming from. So 2Zoo, look at things from the other person's point of view. 3Tree is the easiest, because at the very top of that Christmas tree was the smiley face guy. So basically, all that is to remind us to smile more, basically. And it sounds like a pretty simple tip, but there are about 50% of the population typically walk around with kind of a neutral expression on their face, and a lot of times we may feel happy, but we may not show it, right? I'll give you an example of this. When I first started in the business world, I wanted to. I was working for a little tiny independent oil company in the thriving metropolis of Big Spring, Texas, and I wanted to show folks that I was working with that I was a hard worker, right? And so I would get in early, and I would kind of I would do my work, and I would make sure that when people walked by, they saw that I was really busy, when in reality I really wasn't, because I was brand new, right? But I wanted to let people know that I'm the hard worker, right? I'm going to get there early, I'm going to leave late, that kind of thing. The problem, though, is that because I was kind of creating that impression, it was kind of distancing me from my coworkers a little bit. In fact, one of the ladies that works there, her name was Debbie. She was the office manager, and she and I got to know each other pretty well because she was the one who kind of came and unlocked the door in the morning. And so a lot of times for the first 30 minutes or hour, she and I were the only ones there. And about 3 or 4 weeks into of working for this company, she came up to me and she said, "I'm kind of wondering, are you happy here?" I said, "Yeah, I mean, I'm as happy as the next guy." And I said, "Why do you ask?" And she said, "Well, you always seem like you're in a bad mood." And I said, "No, I mean, I'm pretty happy. I enjoy working here, and I enjoy what I do. I enjoy my work and everything, right?" And she looked at me really dead on, right in the eye. She looked at me and she said, "Maybe you should tell your face, right? Because you're not really showing that around here, right?" And she laughed when she said it. She was very nice, and she was kind of joking around with me. But it kind of hit me very quickly. And so what happened was, that was in the morning while we were kind of drinking coffee. And what I did that morning was, when the 2 guys that kind of worked in the same cubicle area that I worked in, when they came in for the first time, I greeted them when they came in. I smiled at them and said good morning. And all of a sudden, about an hour or so, not even that, I'd say about 15 or 20 minutes after I kind of greeted the 2 of them, one of the 2 guys kind of came up to me and he kind of mentioned, he said, "Hey, I know when you're starting here, things are kind of tough, and if you have any questions, make sure to ask me." I was like, "Oh, thank God," because I had like a ton of questions I really wanted to ask him, right? But it was the greeting that was the warm smile that I had on my face that kind of made it to where I was now approachable. So a lot of times what you want to keep in mind about your facial expressions is that sometimes if they're neutral, or if you're in kind of a stoic area, then you can be sometimes unapproachable to other people, or other folks might not want to kind of walk in. So keep that in mind. So for door, in that door frame was the nameplate, and the tip is you want to make an effort to remember people's name. Dale Carnegie said that a person's name is to that person the sweetest, most important sound in any language, and it really is the truth. If you're ever in a conversation with somebody, you want them to really pay attention, then say their name right before whatever it is that you want them to pay attention to, and they will pay attention to it. And in fact, there's a session on the boot camp videos that if you have access to our membership site, you'll be able to see. It's on how to remember names. So we kind of show you how to remember names. So it's another memory technique that you can kind of keep in mind. So it is a really, really cool skill, and something that if you can do it, you really set you apart from other folks as well. So make an effort to remember names. 5 Hive in the B feet is the beast of burden, right? So, and the principle there is that just basically you want to avoid burdening other people with your problems. So don't place the burden of your problems on other people is the actual principle. Well, basically what it means is that you want to be the person that people go to for solutions. You don't want to be the person that's always got the problem, right? So it's okay to ask for help, by the way, especially if you're new and you need help, that kind of thing. But eventually, you want to be the person that other folks go to when they need help, right? So if you're constantly unloading or dumping on other people, you're going to kind of create that reputation. So avoid placing the burdens of your problem on other people. It's a very small percentage of the population that kind of violate that, but the ones that do, you kind of know about it. You know, my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Lofton, she used to say, "Misery loves company," right? And that's kind of the technique is that the folks who are kind of miserable, they kind of get people around them that are also more miserable, and it creates that burden that you want to be very careful of. So 5 Hive in the B feet is the beast of burden. Don't place the burdens of your problems on other people. 6 Sick is in the hospital bed. You got that cell phone. It's the old-timey cell phone, right? Old-timey cell phone, which is kind of hard to communicate with. And so the principle is the leader is the person who takes responsibility to make sure that the communication has occurred. By the way, and it's a very specific principle. A lot of times folks will read and they'll say, "Oh, you got to communicate clearly." Well, that's not exactly what we're talking about here. Yes, you do want to communicate clearly, but the leader is the person who makes sure that the communication has occurred, who takes the responsibility for the communication. Because a lot of times it may be that I've communicated clearly, but the other person really wasn't listening. And it doesn't really matter that the person wasn't listening to me. The communication still didn't occur, right? So I can't really just blame the other person for not listening. I have to take responsibility and make sure that communication has occurred. So I'll give you an example of this. Let's say, for instance, that I've got somebody that works for me that is not the most detail-oriented kind of person, right? And so I give the person 5 items that I need that person to accomplish by the end of the week. And that's it. Just tell that person verbally those 5 things on Monday, hoping that on Friday those 5 things are going to be done. Well, the odds are when Friday comes around, half of those things aren't even going to be started, much less completed, if that person is not very detail-oriented. So if I know that to be the case, then if I'm the leader, I'm going to take responsibility to make sure that communication has occurred. So for instance, I might give the information to the person verbally and then follow up with an email. And then on Wednesday, I might check in and say, "Hey, how are those 5 things coming?" Just kind of refresh the memory, that kind of thing. So those little things like that are what really help people succeed. And so take responsibility for clear communication. And then the final one, 7 Heaven, tumble down the stairway to heaven is the Bose headset. So you want to be basically the headset. The noise canceling headphones the tip is that you want to be a good listener, practice good listening skills, right? A lot of times the biggest part of the communication process is not what we say to each other, it's what we hear when the other person kind of tells us something. So sometimes you have to kind of listen between the lines and that kind of thing. So make an effort to be a good listener. In the High Impact Leaders class, we kind of do a quick little exercise, and we kind of focus on different levels of listening, which is kind of fun, basically. One of the things that we kind of tell people is that the lowest level of listening is when you're not listening at all. You kind of ignore people. The next level is when you're pretending to listen. You're not really listening, but you're kind of pretending to. The third level of listening is when you're listening for your own content. You're selectively listening, and then finally is you're listening attentively. So the 4th level of listening. And so one of the exercises that we do that's kind of fun is we'll kind of put people into groups of 3, and we'll have each one of the people in the small group kind of so one will tell something important to the group, and the other people will listen at one of those lower levels. And it's usually pretty funny. They start laughing because the things that they tend to do are pretty absurd. But after that exercise, one of the things we kind of focus on is that how many of those things that we thought were absurd and that we really exaggerated are things that we kind of do to people in our office, though, right? So, like for instance, when folks come in and they've got something really important, how many of us will kind of sit with still at our computer with our hands, up on the keyboard, right? Instead of kind of turning and focusing on the person. So, if you want to be a good listener, one of the things that, at least if you want to give the appearance of being a good listener anyway, if you kind of look people in the eye when they're talking to you, another good skill is to kind of get on their level. So if they're seated, you probably want to be seated too. If they're standing, you want to be standing as well. And then put your shoulders parallel to theirs. You do those three things, it's almost impossible to not listen to somebody. If you kind of remember back to times that you've kind of missed something in a conversation, it's usually because we're doing something else. And it's kind of hard. It's very difficult to kind of be on your cell phone, kind of clicking things if you're looking people in the eye and you're at their level and you have your shoulders kind of parallel to them. So just a couple of quick things that you can do to kind of be a good listener. Okay, so those are the 7 things that you can do to build trust and rapport. In later sessions, we're going to cover some other things. We're going to in the next session we're going to cover 7 ways to resolve conflicts. Later on, we're going to show you 7 things that you can do other than criticizing people to gain cooperation from them. And then finally, once you've mastered those first 21 principles, the last 7 are how do you build strong leaders around you? How do you build that next generation of leaders? So hang with us, do that step-by-step process and practice these principles 1 principle a day, and you can't help but become a great leader along the way.